We're now interested in solving quadratics. If you remember, a quadratic equation is any equation that is of the form ax squared plus bx plus c. Now, we're going to learn 4 different methods to solve these. Okay. Not all of them always work. In fact, the only methods that will always work are the last 2 we're going to learn. Unfortunately, they're also the hardest to use. So, we're going to learn the easier methods that often will work first. And you should always try this first method at least before you try one of the harder methods. Now, a warning. Okay. This is our 4th warning of the class. In order to solve either by factoring or by the formula, you have to have one side equal to 0. You can't have non-zero terms on both sides of the equation. Okay. So, in our 3 examples, we notice that our first 2 already have an equal to 0 on one side, whereas the last one doesn't. So we're going to have to do something about that before we can try to factor. So, how do we do this? We look at this equation, it's quadratic, and we immediately say, does it factor? So in this case, I'm looking for 2 numbers that multiply to positive 6 and add to negative 5, and those exist, negative 2 and negative 3. So it factors as x minus 2 times x minus 3 equal to 0. Now, the reason we can solve by factoring is something called the zero property rule, meaning that if 2 numbers multiply to 0, because 0 is such a special number, we know that at least one of them must be 0. So we're going to take these 2 terms and set them to 0 individually. And then we can solve them. So this means that either x equals 2 or x equals 3. Those are our solutions to the equation. We try the next one. In this case, we're looking for 2 numbers that multiply to positive 12 and add to positive 7. And we say, hey, 3 and 4 work. So it must factor as x plus 3 times x plus 4 equal to 0. We again set each of these equal to 0 separately and solve them to get x is negative 3 or x is negative 4. Our 2 solutions to the equation. Okay, remember, a quadratic should always have 2 answers, so we're checking and make sure that the answers actually make sense. If I'd gotten 3 answers, I'd have known immediately something was wrong. Now on this one, as we mentioned already, before we can factor it, we have to get a 0 on one side. Now, it doesn't actually matter which side you put the 0 on, but there is a best choice. We like our x squared term to have a positive coefficient, a positive number in front of it. So I don't want to move the x squared over to the right, because that would make it negative x squared. Instead, I want to move these terms over to the left to keep it a positive x squared. So it turns into x squared plus 6x plus 9 equal to 0. Now, I'm looking for 2 numbers that multiply to 9 and add to 6, 3 and 3. So I get x plus 3 times x plus 3 equal to 0. I set each of them to 0 separately. And I get x equals negative 3 or negative 3. Now, you're allowed to have a repeated root like this. Okay. We still have 2 answers, negative 3 and negative 3. They just happen to be the same answer. Okay. And this is how you solve quadratic equations by factoring.